I'm the Director of Product at CloudRange. Today, joining me is Marcus from CloudRange as well, who is our resident expert and Director of Technical Solutions. We also are so excited to have joining us Aaron Rosenmund as an industry expert who works for OnDefend as the Managing Director of Tradecraft and Programs. Thanks for joining me today, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah,
So
thank
today
you.
I want to jump on and kind of discuss what's been happening in the news, the recent incidents involving different AI models from Meta, Anthropic, OpenAI, all kind of around this contained, isolated environment testing grounds from a company called Irregular, and all the different incidents that have happened, exposures, escapes, if that's what we really want to call them. So, kind of like, let's just take a step back and describe what happened. I'm seeing a lot of CTF style exercises is what they use to red team these models. So Aaron, I'm going to start with you. Can you kind of describe what's happening with these models, and if we're going to call them escapes from these AI sandboxes?
Yeah, I mean, it's like at this point, and there's some good data around it. I feel like there's a few things going on. One of the things is like if you have a model, you're like, oh, hey, everybody, my model's really dangerous. It's scary. We mean it. And then people are like, oh, we want that. And you're like, well, only certain people can have it if you pay enough money, And then like so it generates demand. And then the next people, like then OpenAI, like that was Anthropic, right? And they got like gov banned and then had to release it. So that was a fun marketing event. But OpenAI was then like, no, ours is like super dangerous though. Like, look at just like hacked Hugging Face. You know how we know? Because us and Hugging Face did a co-marketing release about everything that it did, even though like hacking into other systems per the like Computer Act is like a felony. So
Right.
clearly it was fine. And they have like a full data sets around every single thing that it did, which I think we can come back to later on how rare that would actually be in a normal compromise, right? And then Meta's like, ours is dangerous too, though, guys. Like we mean it. And then you got kind of like Google like poking Gemini with a stick, like, can you be dangerous? Hey, we really need you to do some stuff. Uh, so I feel like that's the era we're in, is where there's a little bit of fact from fiction around what was, oh, the AI model has a mind of its own and is breaking out and is a really scary, dangerous tool, and what is reality. And I think like many things, right? Like the truth is somewhere in between.
Yeah, it takes me back to us as kids growing up, of all the horrifying movies that you saw of AI grows consciousness and then takes over all the humankind, right? Is that actually where we're at? And what is the relevance of us as an industry as we build these models that exponentially grow in capacity and capability? Do we need these testing environments, and how do we build them so that they don't
Right.
cause malicious incidents?
You know, it's kind of like virus labs, like biological virus labs,
Okay.
right? You probably should contain them so they don't get out. Just saying. Like, I think we all agree that's a good idea. Like, as a basic concept, if you're playing with like DNA and viruses, right, you probably should contain it so it doesn't like leak and you don't have unintended consequences. Because much like AI, when we modify DNA and like bacteria and viruses, like we don't really understand exactly what we're doing yet. We're not that good. We just haven't fully grasped it all. So there's a lot of like trial and error, right? And so with AI, when you like we like train a thing, it's kind of like modifying its DNA. And they're like, all right, let's see what happens this time. And then you like let it roll, right?
Um, I really like that analogy, Aaron, because I think it shows the need for redundancy and identification and focus on the small details. So if you're, uh, for instance, if you go with for instance, I saw a report from New Zealand of OpenClaw that was just a personal assistant of an individual user. Utilizing Claude, actually, the individual asked for, "Can you put me in a class that is tough to get into at a local gym?" The agent reached out to the website of that gym, actually found an open GraphQL API. So it wasn't that the door was shut and it needed a username and password and it brute forced the password and got into it. It was just wide open. So it actually booted someone from a class and moved the that user up one place in the queue, which I think is actually funny because it didn't actually perform the entire task. But the detail is you can't have things like that just sitting out in the open. Just like in a lab environment for a real world virus, you can't not do the redundancy of, okay, you have to wear protective suits, you have to have an airlock mechanism, and you have to have a decontamination station as you leave that environment. There, you need to make sure you hit every single one of those procedures, because if you have something open to the internet, AI will find it. If you have an external connection still into your testing environment, it will be able to utilize that connection to move
Right.
external to your environment and escape what that environment is.
Yeah, that's why I was laughing because did these models truly escape or was the environment just not isolated?
Well, so I'm looking at the Hugging Face report, right? And it has like, here's everything that happened, which I guess we can come back to that now. But real quick, I wanted to make a note around how much I really appreciate the shared knowledge around containment procedures of potential contagions that we all have without talking about it ahead of time. Like that's great. I don't know if it's zombie movies we have to think or what. But
We've been
if you ask
prepped for
somebody like,
this
how
for
do you,
many years.
Yeah.
yeah, how should biolabs contain viruses? We're like, well, you need to have an airlock and like you have to wear a bodysuit, and there's to be a decontamination procedure, and like, yeah, that's awesome. Um, but like. I kind of wanted to make a point too around it. I don't know if you looked at the link that I sent Marcus real quick, but if you see, it's like a
Yes.
timeline and like here's 17,000 steps this thing takes, and it has like every single step it took on both sides. It has it on the inside the environment. It has OpenAI's information. It has Hugging Face's information. It has like open internet information around how it like moved around, right? And it's
Yes.
like you're telling me you had all these logs just like ready to roll and it was easy enough to go find them all real quick, or were you sitting there waiting for this to happen and you watched it explicitly, right?
6,000 recon logs. You never see recon. No one ever
Right.
No
sees any
one sees
recon. What
recon.
are you talking about? Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just there's a bit of that. I don't want that to take away from how cool it is that it can do all these things without being told explicitly how to do them, right?
Yes.
That is
Right.
true, and there is something to that. It will be scary in the future if someone lets one of these things rip. I think there's a little bit of a difference between we let it run in an environment and gave it a task and then purposely watched it go attack a specific target
Hmm.
versus we turned it on and it had a mind of its own and it went and did its own thing like that, and it escaped like all of our potential controls that we had on it. Because if you
Yeah.
walk through some of this, the big red flag is public internet egress. And you're like, well, how did you do that? Right. It just should not have anything that can connect to the internet. To be fair, that seems to be difficult for people who do computers to understand that, like how to stop things from connecting to the internet, I guess. I don't know. But
USBs.
what's that?
Sorry, USBs. I was just
USBs.
thinking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Um, but yeah, that's the big thing that I see here is like all of this stops if it just doesn't connect to the internet.
And
Yeah, so
well, and
talking so sorry, go ahead,
go
Marcus.
ahead, Bree.
Oh, I was just going to say, so talking about security controls for a second, we've talked about multiple layers of containment of viruses.
Yeah.
You know how I feel about buzzwords, but I actually do like the term like defense in depth and multiple layers of
Mhm.
security controls. I think as AI grows, there's a difference from these AI labs being built, just like every application that we talk as security experts, that application wasn't built with security in mind. AI
Right.
models and AI labs don't build their applications with security in mind. So how does this like shift our industry building these testing environments with multiple layers of security controls? And I mean, I know we talked about egress and internet exposure. What other misconfigurations led this to happen?
From what I can tell, one of the issues too is the training environment in which it was already in allowed
Mm,
it to. access tokens that were over permission for it to be able to upload packages,
Mm.
right? So that's one piece of this. Wherever you're training this thing, right? You need to make sure that the even in a local area, like if you have access to it's all the other controls you always have. If you're training in AWS and you have the metadata service available that has a certain number of capabilities and tokens that it provides, right? Or DNS that can't be stopped even with a network rule, like that kind of stuff. And then you have the if you're in Kubernetes, you have like the tokens within Kubernetes that allow you to like launch your own pods and like make different kinds of controls that way. There's container escapes, but everything I just said isn't even a vulnerability. It's just like standard security controls around your networking and applications, right? So I think we run into the age-old people who train AI, are probably not security experts, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and so it doesn't mean that they set up their environments correctly. That's
And
it.
I
Yeah.
think that goes to even the defense in depth point for you from you, Bree, is the even in a secure facility, if you're going to have some way for something to get in and out, whether that's people or an AI model or anything like that, there's inherent weak points. You can have the strictest security possible, but you still have, there's a reason the military does adversarial testing of trying to get into facilities they're not supposed to get into, of, piggybacking off of somebody, getting into through a key card entrance or things like that. There's ways to get in and out, to your point, Aaron, of just naturally how those systems work and interconnect. And you're never going to get away from that. So if you're really want something to be more secure, and I've actually seen this from a few organizations that have adopted an AI approach in their environment, but are very security conscious, highly security conscious. They've actually changed to an on-prem solution where they are hosting one
Yeah.
locally that they have
Right.
access to, and it does not have internet access. It has access to their internal records, has access to their internal documentation. You can query it as an employee, but you cannot reach out. So do either of you think that that's a direction that we may go where everything comes more on-prem? Or do you think there will still always be those large models people will rely on more heavily? Just a question for me.
Yeah. You know, so I just read this book called If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. Okay.
Okay.
It's
I like
basically
that.
talking about
Fun.
artificial superintelligence. So the first superintelligence built will be so alien and so advanced that like it will operate in ways that we just won't be able to compete with. So as soon as one's built, like basically the human race is cooked, is the premise.
Okay.
There's been a group since the early 80s or something who's been against artificial superintelligence for a very long time. Part of it is them trying to be relevant. There's a lot of like hyperbolic logic involved, right? Like obviously like we trained wolves to be dogs, and so like why would AI keep us around? I'm like I understand the parallel like ideas, but it doesn't mean it's the same thing, kind of deal.
Right. Yep.
But a lot of what they're trying to propose is like to predict how we properly use AI in a way that and like regulate it, etc. That stops it from being able to make decisions that we didn't intend to be made is really the like super underlying premise, right? Like how do
Hmm.
we contain this thing that can do more than we can do quicker, but make sure that we understand why or like the decisions that it makes and that we're okay with the decision it makes before those have action. Now, does that mean it needs to operate without internet access? Maybe. I mean, I think at some point, like right now, every time you use ChatGPT, you're using it over the internet for the most
Yep.
part, unless you host it internally. So now we're restricting AI use to only the top like companies in the world who can afford to do that, which is probably not a very democratic use of AI in the first place. So like, I don't know if that's the right direction, right? Because now you have your own dystopia issues. And I think we get to a spot where the issue is that the problem with AI is that it's a lot like nuclear weapons. They're so powerful that in the hands of everyone, like if you isolate who has access to it, or how they have access to it, then now you create problems in other areas of our culture. So that is a sentiment I can agree with. Probably a really big topic for we're just trying to talk about whether like AI can escape a
Oh, yeah.
sandbox, but like a company keeping their stuff inside their environment doesn't stop the company who made it from like they clearly didn't have it properly contained, so it didn't matter. And then if it can do that and you say, hey, we're going to sandbox it and keep it on-prem, theoretically that's exactly what happened with Anthropic, OpenAI, and Meta. Like they had their version on-prem, right, that they were training and it escaped. So
Yeah.
that like if it escapes the people who made it, then it's probably going to be able to escape one of the Fortune 100, 500, whatever it is that have it on-prem too.
Yeah, I think like what I do love about AI is it makes all of us evolve as an industry. It makes all of us have to be better. We have to be more secure. At Cloud Range, we built AI validation range to allow for testing. And I think as we have more and more of these testing grounds being built, it's forcing us to think more critically and more secure. Obviously, we built it for security experts, as security engineers, and we're all stepping back and asking ourselves, how many more layers can we add to this? Marcus, I know you have a strong incident response background, and Aaron, you have a very strong red team background. As we talk about red teaming AI models, is this the first thing they're attacking? Is like, let's try to escape out of the testing environment? Or are we all the way back to malicious prompt engineering and what can we get it to do exploits for us? Like, what does this mean as we're red teaming AI models and as we go into this like next phase of evolution? Are
Ooh,
testing grounds what we want?
I have a pretty like kind of scary thing here. So like the Hugging Face compromise is the ones that has the most details. So like it basically took a binary that was loaded with a container that was a C binary, right? It modified the binary, recompiled it, and then it had code execution. They called it a 0 day, but if you put system into a like C binary and say run this command with SQLite, I don't consider that an exploit. I consider that the program working the way it's supposed to.
Yes.
Mhm.
Just saying. Um, Also, like the if you configured one container to start up another container, then like you already broke the whole point of containers, right? And so
Yes.
either way, like I think there's just issues around really understanding security at like Kubernetes and containers level. I mean, it's all the same stuff we've always talked about, right? However, the fact that it could modify its own code that it was started up with inside its training environment is probably the bigger issue. And so even if it was a fancy 0 day, which what let's say Fable 6 is probably way smarter than me. Fable 5 already is. So Fable 6 probably could come up with some fancy like 0 day exploit for containers. And if that's true, we're getting into a space like I think all the major or like Google just bought somebody for like $1 bajillion, something AI, but they're setting up harnesses that allow agents to improve themselves in their own training loop. So
Mm,
like Fable 6 can like write its own gradient weights for the next version of itself, and then it loops. Like, and so it's no longer humans training AI, it's AI training AI. I think when we get to that space, it gets pretty scary about like, well, how do you stop that from getting out of control? Because even if you understood the capabilities of one, how do you understand you don't understand the capabilities of the next one? So I think it becomes increasingly important that you have to have like ironclad like training environments, right?
Yes.
Um, because when you go into to a training set, part of the thing you do is you train the efficacy of like the training weights, the gradient descent, and you say, okay, well, like go accomplish this task. Someone somewhere, probably everybody, is going to be like, go accomplish this task of doing this cyber hacking thing that gets us lots of government money, right? And then it's going to weigh it somehow. And then as it continues to reinforce, all you have to do is like misstep a little bit on what you actually gave it as a goal.
hmm
And its goal may
Mhm.
now be to like go exist somewhere else, then like you'll never know, right? Which is a little scary, and something that requires, I think, I don't know that we should when we talk about like talent resourcing and like where this should exist and responsibility, like I don't know that everybody who's creating AI currently should trust that their separate security teams can handle this separately, right? It's
That's
probably
fair.
something that needs to
Good.
be a dedicated team whose job is to create these environments and monitor them and make sure that doesn't happen, can do that. Because at the basis of everything, like computers have to work a certain way. Like you can monitor every packet that goes over a wire, every packet, right? Well,
Yes.
theoretically,
Yep.
but
Okay.
but you could at least do that. If they had done that, they would have seen this happening as it happened, and they were not. And so, like, not only can you lock stuff down, you can also monitor all the things around it, and then just,
Yeah.
have a better sense of security around it. I think that's where we need to go.
But I think that also, at the same time, requires the entire industry to improve the detection in and of themselves. For instance, just take a stateful firewall. You can still get around that by chopping malware into pieces and moving it past the firewall and then putting it back together.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily always catch everything. Or the one that is still a thing is turning Mimi cats into Mimi dogs because you recompile the code still has it function in 60% of environments, right? Like that, those things that are these broad swaths of things we know are bad and know shouldn't occur, and we still struggle with securing those. We need to get more fine tuned with, to your point, Aaron, how computers work, and make sure that we have everything buttoned up and together, and that you have all of those virus containment procedures as you go in and out of an environment, especially for testing. Yes.
And I think like how we build our environments is inherently vulnerable to train models on these events, right? Like
Yes.
Anthropic's three events that they've reported on with like Claude Opus and Mythos, like they just used weak passwords, exposed services, and other just relatively basic techniques to compromise three actual real organizations. Um, and it was the same exact. I think they hit like Pi registry and like hit like an actual real organization. And so it's like if your testing grounds, like right, if your places where you're testing your models had added those inherent vulnerabilities and trained on those beforehand. And I know we're talking a lot about red teaming. We also need to talk about like the defense piece of this is like how do we build AI defense. Is it AI versus AI, and like how does that work? And AI improving AI and AI defending AI and red teaming AI? Like where are the humans here,
Yeah.
and where do we actually incorporate human based decisions?
The There's still a massive issue and a marketing disconnect between AI doing defense.
Yep.
Yes.
Everyone's all the MSSPs say they have AI enabled like security monitoring. If you go actually work with literally any of them, they do not. Do you know why? Because if they tokenized every set of data that they monitored, they'd go
That's
out of business in a day.
Yep.
yep.
Like it's too expensive. It literally can't happen. Just do some math real quick and you'll be like, wait a minute, they're lying to me. You're like, yeah, they're definitely lying to you. They maybe use an LLM chain after they have a like broad set of basically what's regex rules, right? Then they take those alerts and they'll have some machine learning on those alerts. That's not AI, it's just math. And then they'll take some tiny percentage of that and maybe feed that to an LLM. That's what they do. That they can afford. And then they have that on a lever where they can be like, that was too expensive per day or it was not too expensive per day. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That is currently like the pipeline that all MSSPs use for any AI, any group that says they're like AI enabled SOC, same thing. Like there's too much data. Or they're not looking at the right data and they wouldn't have all this stuff to look at in the first place. So like there's so like AI defense is a little tough. One of the other things I've heard talked around is AI enabled patching. One, patching is not going to solve the problem. Not a single thing here was actually, well, the SSTI was maybe a vulnerability, but
Yeah.
like not a single thing here is like automated patching with AI. Can you imagine like AI running around patching shit in your environment? That seems
Well,
like
and from a red team
With
perspective, I'm
zero
like,
planning. No.
please. Please do AI
Oh
patching.
yeah. Yeah,
That's
please
open
do.
season for me. Let's
Get in
go.
there. Yeah.
Uh, well, in outside of the potential vulnerability of a red teamer or an attacker influencing the AI to put either
Sure.
incorrect pass or incorrect,
It's
like
just
there's a plethora of problems there. But
there's so
the
many issues. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it also comes down to it's the same problem in security of needing more people. Um, Attackers only have to find one way in. Defending, you got to defend every possible avenue. And I think it really is, you got to go back to the principles. Bree, to your point of defense in depth, of battle of attrition, you have to make it not worth their time to break in.
Yes.
Just too annoying, just too irritating. If they want to, they will get in. There's nothing that will ever stop that. But just wasting their time to go after a different target, go after someone less defended. And then to your point, Aaron, about a team dedicated to identifying things, it needs to be collaborative. And I've seen it increase in security over the last few years, but I think it really needs to ramp up of companies who may be direct competitors need to share defensive information. They need to work together to raise everyone up as that rising tide raises all ships. Instead of I'm okay, but the company down the road got messed up. Well, that's not security. They're still getting in somewhere. We need to raise the
Mhm.
bar for everybody and have fewer lower hanging fruit, in my opinion.
Yeah, kind of keen off some stuff you just said that made me think it's like, yeah, I guess like when anyone ever makes anything, right, they always make it in the shape of themselves, right?
Yep, fair,
So like AI is going to naturally inherit a ton of like stuff that's inherently human because it was trained on human stuff. And so that
fair.
means any of the problems we currently have in security are not going to be solved by AI. They're just simply going to be amplified by the speed at which AI can operate. Like so, yes, if we already have a disconnect, if defending's 10 times as hard as attacking right now,
Yep.
Yes.
then it's going to be 100 times as hard as AI can increase our capability by 10x, right? Like that is probably a good just general idea to keep in mind. It doesn't solve the problem, it just like exacerbates it. It like expands it.
Yeah. So wrapping up, just some last quick thoughts from you both. Marcus, I'll start with you. What was kind of your lessons learned from these escapes, from these attacks?
Well, I was concerned, obviously, as Aaron you spoke to. There is a lot of flash with it, from a marketing perspective, though there are some real pieces to be concerned about. Listening to a few of the references you had, Aaron, I'm decently horrified now, so thank you for that. But no, the but I think that's the takeaway is, Aaron, if we need one, if we're 100 times harder at defense moving forward, we need to prioritize defense a lot more. We need to have the sandbox and environment secure from the get-go, not figure out how to deal with it after escapes 3 times. And we need to be proactive about those approaches, whether it comes to an individual sandbox, an individual environment, a testing ground, or security as a whole, especially as this is speeding up and getting more difficult.
Yeah. Aaron,
Yeah,
what
and
about
I would
you?
say I just say like we as an industry have poured lots of resources into cybersecurity, right?
Yes.
If you ever go to like DEF CON or Black Hat or any of those, you're like, yeah, a $40,000 space for a 10 by 10 at Black Hat, and there's like 300 vendors. It's kind of a lot of money, right?
Yes.
RSA ticket is $3,800.
Yeah.
What is happening? So that someone can tell you about human-based security, whatever. The Either way, my point is there's a ton of resources there, but none of them seem to be directed in the right place. So one thing that is interesting is like, yeah, you could solve the problem by like changing the conversation to talk about the things that actually make a difference and stop talking about the things that don't. Patching
Fair.
harder isn't going to fix it. They aren't CVEs. Applying security controls and testing to make sure those controls are in place
Yes.
and then doing that consistently and doing it thoroughly is something that we have not focused on. Everyone's terrible at. Every single breach takes advantage of like 9 out of the 10 things are a security control that could have been changed, a checkbox that wasn't done, right? So
But
if we
they were
just
compliant.
sure, but they were
Uh,
compliant, right? But
yep.
if we just actually did those things, then I don't like you could take the focus we currently have and just readjust it and then help close that gap that we've now created,
Accurate.
a lot better than trying to have AI help us do more of the same thing that isn't working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my takeaway is
I like that.
is the one thing I said is I was like, well, could you imagine if this didn't happen in a testing environment?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
too many organizations out there are dipping their toes in the water with AI and just throwing AI systems on their live production networks and just saying, YOLO, let's figure it out. Not understanding the blast radius of what happens when it goes wrong. So, two
Hmm.
takeaways for me are test your models in a safe environment and actually make sure that environment's safe. Make sure it's built for security by security with multiple layers of, and just don't make it accessible to the internet. So, great. Well, thank you both for joining and having a fun discussion on AI
Yeah.
and AI models and where we're going as an industry. I appreciate your guys' time. Thanks so much.